The curse of Manasseh and the hidden face of God. Why, O Israel, have you suffered so long? You have not heard from your God for 2,500 years. The righteous among you have sought him with all their heart and all their love, yet he has remained hidden. Why, O Israel, do you cry in your Tachanun prayer? How long will your strength be in bondage, your splendor in the power of the enemy? Why then, O Israel, have you suffered and survived, excelled and are shunned? Was it really because of baseless hatred that your temple was lost and your long, painful diaspora began? Or have you failed to heed the words of your great prophets? My people suffer from a lack of knowledge. This is what the Lord had said. I will make them abhorrent to all the kingdoms on the face of the earth, because of what Manasseh, son of Hezekiah, king of Judah, did in Jerusalem. The crimes of King Manasseh against Adonai are well recorded in the books of the kings of Judah and Israel. After Manasseh came his grandson, King Josiah, who was the most righteous king. He restored everything as it was written in the book of the law. Nevertheless, the Lord did not turn away from the heat of his fierce anger, which burned against Judah because of all Manasseh had done to provoke him to anger. You may ask, how can these events of 2.5 millennia ago still impact on modern history? I will ask, what has atoned for the crimes, the curse of King Manasseh? If the sincere repentance, sacrifices and guilt offerings of King Josiah and those of the good priest Ezra and the good governor Nehemiah after him could not make such atonement, and the face of Adonai has remained hidden, it is clear that it would require a guilt offering, a sham, of extraordinary proportions. While in captivity, Adonai revealed that he would provide such a guilt offering through his suffering servant, of whom it was said, "Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life a guilt offering, he will see his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand." The guilt offering is a sacrifice to be brought for atonement of sins against the holy or set apart or kadosh things of God. The subject has to be a ram from the flock without blemish, and of the proper value in silver according to the sanctuary shekel. This is the only sacrifice of which the subject has a monetary value. If we follow the guilt offering of the suffering servant, we find that his life is valued at 30 shekels, which amount was paid to Judas for his life by the chief priests, the custodians of the sanctuary shekel. It is an entirely Torah-based procedure to deal with the extreme sins against the holy things of Adonai by King Manasseh. It is a Jewish thing, much more than it is a Christian thing. Why, O Israel, have you failed to recognize him as your own? Your great prophet had warned that you would not esteem him. Yet another said that eventually you would. On that day I will pour out on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication, and they will look to me, Adonai, on account of the one they pierced, the suffering Messiah. And they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only son, says Zechariah, and confirmed in Tractate Sukkah 51 and 52. This is what another great prophet, Ezekiel, said about that time. In that day I will no longer hide my face from them, for I will pour out my spirit on the house of Israel. There is a correlation between the house of David's recognition of the suffering servant and Adonai no longer hiding his face from them. And there is another reason why you have failed to recognize him. You have been denied his true identity by the authors of the New Testament, the non-Jewish church fathers and Christianity. Your suffering Messiah, Mashiach ben Yosef, has been made unrecognizable by being presented as Adonai himself at the premature fulfillment of prophecy. There is bondage on the set times of Israel, bondage on Israel and bondage on the church. The book of the Revelation, which is a book of corrective denial. In Revelations 10, God says, the prophetic expectation has become delayed. The latter half of Daniel's 70th week will commence upon revoking of the delay, according to Revelations 11, which reveals the latter half of week 70, the 42 months, 1260 days, times and half a time. This is when your great Prince Michael will arise and fight for Israel in the heavenly realm, says Daniel 12 and Revelations 12. We have lived in a time vacuum in the middle of Daniel's 70th week, ever since the departure of Yeshua, Mashiach ben Yosef, the anointed prince, who appeared in the 69th and was cut off in the middle of the 70th week, according to the vision of Daniel. His ministry occupied the first half of week 70, then time stopped for Israel. The Jewish people, having failed to recognize the anointed one of week 69, as Isaiah predicted in his 53rd chapter, find themselves in an unrecognizable pre-69 position. The church, having misrepresented Yeshua as having fulfilled the 70, finds itself in a non-existent post-70th position. They are separated by time and forever fail to understand each other. They are both in bondage, the latter believing that it has replaced the former and has tried to exterminate it through much of these 2,000 years. It is the origin of replacement theology with its undercurrent of anti-Semitism. When the delay is revoked, the third temple will be there. Mashiach ben David will be born in Bethlehem, build the temple and be raptured in the face of tremendous onslaught when time resumes for Israel and Prince Michael arises. Both Daniel 7 and Revelation 12 agree on this. The Lion of Judah. At the completion of the 70th week he will return with Adonai and come to his temple, according to Malachi 3. What then about bondage? After his death and having been raised up, Yeshua lived with his disciples for 40 days. Before being taken up, they asked him if he was going to restore the kingdom of Israel at that time. He replied, "It has not been given to you or anyone to know the time that God has set by his own right." And he said, "But the Spirit will come upon you. You will be my witnesses to bring Torah to the world." So today the whole world knows the 10 words. 10 days later, a man in his midst whom he had often repudiated, example, Satan, go away from me, stood up and declared that God says the last days kingdom of Israel has fully and finally been restored, never to be shamed again, with himself in their midst, and they knew it, after which the Holy Spirit has now come, as spoken of by the prophet Joel. Clearly, Yeshua was right. History has proven that. But the other man, Peter, was wrong. None of the things expected from Joel's prophecy have come about. Israel have experienced their worst shaming ever since then. And world peace expected of the last days failed to materialize. Surely the test of the prophet should have failed him. So what has resulted from this error? The key is Joel 2 verse 27. You will know that I am in Israel, that I am Adonai your Elohim, and that there is no other. Never again will my people be shamed. After that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh of restored Israel. History has it that Papias, bishop of Hierapolis, and Clement of Alexandria, recorded that Peter gave Mark the first gospel story verbatim on their way to Rome, and that he wrote down every word. Yeshua, who had been in their midst, and whom they knew, had to be Adonai of Joel 2:27, and is introduced as such first in Mark's Gospel from Isaiah 40 verse 3 to 5 and Malachi 3 verse 1a, and from there as source material in all the other Gospels. It was then Yeshua, acting as Adonai, who would pour out or baptize with the Ruach HaKodesh, as Mark records in 1:8 from Joel 2:28. Peter is the main force behind the Gospel stories and influenced them all. So it can be seen how the Gospel story and the identity of Yeshua departs from Joel 2:27-28, which Yeshua himself had denied had taken place. It has not been given to you to know when the prophecy of Joel is to be fulfilled. There is clear conflict between Yeshua and Peter, yet the church has chosen to believe Peter at the expense of Jesus, making him out to be a liar. Many errors have come forth from this position. The need for an Elijah figure in John the Baptist, which is denied by John's Gospel, and the need to find divinity for Yeshua from a boy who lived and died some 600 years before him, whose name, Emmanuel, contained a message of comfort for the people of that time. The Gospel story presents an intriguing position. Adonai have come to Israel, according to Isaiah 40 verse 3, after their sins had been forgiven, paid for, by the guilt offering. He then remains with them for a time, presents himself as a sin offering for those sins previously forgiven, then departs indefinitely, leaving behind an unbiblical, absentee, last days kingdom. Clearly, the context of the prophecy is lost, and clearly, Jesus would require a different identity for him to be recognized by the people of Israel. Who then would be my people who would never be shamed again? It is not Israel, not yet, but will be when the delay is revoked and the 70 is completed. Yet the church fathers, at their great councils of Nicaea and Chalcedon, in the absence of the people, the temple, and Jerusalem, and without rabbinic guidance, had failed to apply the test of the prophet and decided that the people who would never be shamed again had to speak of the church, who became spiritual Israel, in whom the entire prophetic expectation, including the 70, had been fulfilled. So, how does this relate to bondage? Well, Yeshua had conferred the great powers to bind and to loose on Peter, then addressed him as, "Satan, you are a stumbling block to me," and told him, "Satan had asked to sift you all as wheat." Perhaps this is how the parable or the prophecy of Job had come about. By announcing fulfillment of Joel, and for that matter, the entire prophetic expectation, Peter had prematurely called fulfillment on the 70, 3.5 years early, had stopped the countdown, and had put the legitimate times of Israel in bondage, and loosed a premature spiritualized kingdom. He had given Yeshua an identity which will always be unrecognizable to the yeshiva. And so, bondage on Israel and bondage on the church. Replacement theology, with its curse of anti-Semitism. The church replacing Israel in prophecy, and Yeshua replacing Adonai in prophecy. And we have all been left in a time vacuum in the middle of Daniel's 70th week. Just 3.5 years short of fulfillment, pending revoking of the delay. All of this was foretold by prophecy. The Good Shepherd of Zechariah 7 was told that after him Adonai would raise up a bad shepherd, a man close to him, who would not care for the sheep. So John's Gospel records the last words of Yeshua. "Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? Take care of my sheep." Yet the sheep of Judah and Israel would not follow the hireling. They would not recognize his voice, as Jesus had predicted earlier in the story. So we can connect the dots from Joel to Acts to Mark to all the other gospel stories and further to Isaiah 40 and Malachi 3, and the need to prove the virgin birth and divinity for Yeshua from Isaiah 7, and Elijah also from Malachi. All this to prove full and final fulfillment of prophecy, in that Adonai was also his own Messiah. Peter had created a God-man Messiah that does not exist, who would be empowered to change the set times and the laws, persecute the tzaddikim of Israel, abolish the daily oblation, dishonor the holy covenant, make a strong covenant with many for 1/7, an unbiblical infant baptism covenant originating from the mikvah of Yeshua, which introduced week 70, and covering the entire present extended 70th week. All of this was seen by the prophet Daniel, who related that this person's authority would be limited to week 70. Yet the church, most of it being in a post-70th position, looking for this person in the future. But his time is now. The book of the Revelation records that a local false prophet from the land was expected to have an image made of the beast from which the false one would arise for worship. Gematria for Shimeon Kephah is 666. Yet Yeshua, Mashiach ben Yosef, from the house of Rachel, according to the Talmud, is very real and needs to be recognized for Adonai not to hide his face from Israel any longer. And so, the curse of Manasseh has followed the Jewish people throughout the centuries. The fathers have eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. And the New Testament speaks with two voices. Wherever the church has been a force for good in the world, and there is much, it has been because of the Torah perspectives of Yeshua. Wherever it has done evil, especially towards the Jewish people, it is because of the mistaken eschatological positions of St. Peter, who has misrepresented the prophecy of Joel, misquoted it, presented it in inverted order, and rendered it incomplete, which has changed the message of the prophet completely. It has subverted the plan of God and placed it in bondage, to the detriment of the church and of Israel and of world history. The world is desperate for that time without war of the last days, the Acharit Hayamim, and it is entirely dependent on Israel finding peace in recognizing her suffering Messiah. For the complete story, find the book The Elijah Factor by its author Caleb Ben Huguenot, as published by Amazon Kindle.